fight through school, and I was the one staying up to 2 o'clock in the morning studying and still struggling. I'm a horrible test taker. Horrible test taker. I can know all the answers, but put that test in front of me and I bomb it, or I struggle. And I've never given up. A lot of you know my part of my story, my health challenges, bad relationships, things that could have knocked somebody down completely hardcore. But the thing is I believe that everything in life happens for a reason, and I also believe people are placed in our life for a reason. And I remember when I went through something major in my life, good relationship, gone bad, and I remember coming out feeling the weakest I've ever felt in my life. Like I was no good, I wasn't good enough. My insecurities got deeper, stronger, and I felt like I was not worthy of anything. Through that, I've met so many people in my life that helped me through all of that, helped me build my confidence, helped me. You just have to surround yourself with people that want better for you, just like they do for themselves. And if you do that, like, you're on top of the world when you have people that you surround yourself with that make you better. Like, they don't bring the bad out of you, they bring the good out of you. And from that point on, I fought like hell. I worked my tail off. I busted my butt. I was never a big dreamer, so to think, because my insecurities brought me down. But I remember when I was single for a long time, and my goal was to buy a house. I was tired of paying someone else's mortgage, because that's what you do when you rent. And I wanted to buy a house, and I wanted to buy a house that I could resell one day and make a profit off of. And so I worked and worked and worked and worked. I lost a lot of friends because a lot of my friends were still young. We were still young, and I was 25 years old when I built my first house. My family doesn't come from money. We always worked hard for what we had, and I did. I bought my first house at 25 years old, and that was the biggest accomplishment I felt I've ever done, because I did it by myself. I did it by working my tail off for it, and I had that to show for it, and then I met Chris. My health challenges happened. I was diagnosed with some health challenges, and then I met Chris. I met Chris because of those health challenges. My friend sent me a friend suggestion for him. It was actually his cousin's wife, and I deleted it. I was like, I'm not interested. I don't want to meet a guy. Bye-bye. So I deleted her friend's suggestion for him. I was diagnosed 2 months later, and I went through one of the, I would say, darkest times of my life, because things just got scarier, worse. I thought my life was crumbling underneath me, and I didn't know which way to turn. And I got a friend request from Chris. I was in a really, really, really bad place, and I got a friend request from Chris on Facebook, and I was like, oh, what the heck, I'm never gonna meet him. Except, one thing led to another, and 8 years later, we have 2 kids, we live in Colorado, and he's the best thing that has ever happened to me. And because of my health challenges, because I got so sick, I let him in, and he only knew me at that time. He knew me at my worst, and he accepted me. And through your vows, like through sickness and everything, he's been there. He was the one that let me lay on him and fall asleep for 3.5 hours on his lap while he had to pee. He is the best thing that has ever happened to me. So with that being said, know that no matter what, and I can go on forever with this story, but I want to cut it short so I don't bore you guys. Know that no matter how hard life gets, no matter how low you feel, know that deep down, in your heart, that there's a purpose, there's a reason for everything. We may not understand it at the time, it's hard to understand it at the time. I'm telling you, when I met Chris, I pushed him away. I gave every excuse for him to run. I mean, I gave him an out every single day. I gave him an out. And if you guys know my story with Chris, you know I gave him an out. I mean, he went to my colonoscopy. I tortured him. I rejected him. I pushed him away time and time and time again. But when I canceled dates last minute, because that's how life is with my health challenges, you cancel things last minute, and it's hard for people to get, it's hard for me to understand. But he stuck around, and he stuck around because he was the one for me. And he is amazing. And I can't tell you how wonderful he is. All of this comes from all of this positivity that I'm sharing. My 2 children are because of all of this. Like, all of this. My health challenges happened for a reason. I was told I couldn't have kids, you know, and here I have 2 amazing, crazy, wild children I love dearly. And everything happens for a reason. So if you're at a place where you feel, Dieter, you feel like life's standing on top of you and attacking you, write down, this is homework for everyone, and I do this all the time because I have to life happens. So write down all the things that you think are bad in your life, all the negative in your life, write it down. But then I want you to also, on the other side of the paper, write down what has happened in your life that you're grateful for. The third step is take a pen and mark over, like, connect the 2 things that happened. So, for instance, health challenges, Chris, Mandy, life, right? I can write that I can connect that life health challenge to Mandy. I can connect it to Chris, and I can connect it to everything else that happened because of my health challenges. So do you see what I'm trying to do here? Like, I want you to connect the negatives with the positives in your life. And when you look at that, life becomes so much brighter. Like, so much brighter when you can do that.
My daughter and my grandchildren, they had beautiful lives. They loved each other. Beautiful, yes, inside and out.
I have no idea who gave you the right to take their lives, but I know God and his mighty angels were there at that moment to bring them home to paradise.
In a world where truth and lies often collide, one phone call between a mother and her son would forever change the course of their lives. Don't ever confess to what you didn't do, Chris Watts's mother warned him, but what happens when the truth is too horrific to deny? In this chilling true crime story, the line between guilt, denial, and manipulation blurs, revealing the heartbreaking journey of a mother's loyalty and a son's desperate attempt to control his fate. What happens when the truth is too dangerous to face, and the bond between mother and son becomes both a shield and a prison? The phone call from Chris Watts to his mother, Cindy, in the quiet confines of a prison cell, is where the true unraveling of his carefully constructed facade begins. This phone call would go down in history, not just as a conversation between a son and his mother, but as a chilling window into the psyche of a man who, despite having pled guilty to the brutal murders of his wife and 2 young daughters, still found a way to manipulate the narrative. As the call begins, Chris's voice, familiar and almost soothing, tells Cindy about his decision to plead guilty, not in the way one might expect from someone owning up to a horrific crime, but with a sense of disconnection that lingers in every word. His tone doesn't match the gravity of his actions, and as the conversation unfolds, a disturbing pattern begins to emerge. The words he chooses are soft, carefully crafted to maintain an image he spent years building: a loving father, a devoted husband, and a man whose heart has always been pure. Chris says, "I just want you to know, Mom, that I didn't want this. I never meant for any of it to happen." His confession, however, is shallow, almost mechanical in its delivery, as if he's learned to recite these lines by rote. There is no real emotion in his voice, no weight of guilt, just a cold distance that is hard to ignore. Yet, Cindy, on the other end of the line, remains steadfast. She is unwavering in her belief that Chris is still the same man she raised. "You've got the purest heart of anyone I know," she says, her words a blanket of protection wrapped around a son who is, by all definitions, a monster. There's an eerie disconnect in the conversation. Chris, though admitting to the crime, refuses to show the remorse one might expect from a man who has destroyed the lives of the people closest to him. His words are hollow, as if he has learned to say what is necessary to avoid further questioning but lacks the ability to truly feel the weight of his actions. On the other hand, Cindy, who has watched the world turn against her son, still clings to the belief that his actions were a result of some unexplainable force, a tragic accident that could have happened to anyone. To her, Chris is still the kindest person there ever was. This dynamic, the son trying to shift the blame, to explain away the brutality of his crime with carefully chosen words, and the mother who refuses to accept the reality of her son's monstrous actions, sets the tone for the story that is about to unfold. It's a conversation steeped in denial, manipulation, and the psychological games that would continue to play out in the days, months, and years that followed. The words Chris speaks on this phone call, though cloaked in a semblance of guilt, fail to reflect the reality of the horror he inflicted. His insistence on maintaining the image of the good son exposes his need for self-preservation over accountability. And Cindy's unwavering support for her son, despite the cold facts, introduces a level of moral complexity that will permeate this story. As the conversation comes to a close, Chris reassures his mother, offering her a semblance of comfort, even as the full extent of his crimes hangs in the air. "We'll get through this, Mom," he says. "I'll be okay." But the chilling irony in his words is palpable. For Chris, there is no real sense of remorse or acceptance of responsibility. He has already moved on, not from his actions, but from the consequences. The conversation between Chris and Cindy serves as the first crack in the veneer of Chris's normal life, revealing a man who has manipulated the world around him to keep up appearances. As the documentary progresses, this call becomes a symbol of the tension between Chris's self-image and the brutal reality of his crime. The psychological layers of this story, the manipulation, the denial, and the deep disconnect between what was said and what was truly felt, will continue to unfold as we dive deeper into the mind of a killer who still refuses to face the consequences of his actions. This is just the beginning. The call marks the start of an unraveling that would expose not just the horror of Chris Watts's crime, but the chilling nature of his character, a man whose words were one thing, but whose actions spoke far louder. Thank you for your incredible support. Red Heart. This channel thrives because of viewers like you. Join our YouTube membership today to unlock exclusive perks, enjoy premium content, and help us keep creating the stories you love. In the world that Chris Watts presented to the outside world, he was a model family man. To anyone who knew him, or at least to those who only saw him from the surface, Chris seemed to have it all. A beautiful wife, 2 young daughters, a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The American dream, neatly packaged and presented on social media, captured in photos, posts, and videos that portrayed a life full of happiness and promise.
Yes, your popcorn. Do you want a brother or a sister?
Sister.
You want a little sister?
Yeah.
You want to be a big sister?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Go, Cece. Go, Bella. Careful, Cece. You're going to get dizzy. You're going to get dizzy, Cece. You're going to get dizzy.
Ring around the rosy. Ring
Blow on it, Cece. No, don't let her touch the plate. No, 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 no. Blow on it, Cece. Okay, look. Blow. Cece, blow. Say hi, Cece. Hi. Look at this monster. This is what I deal with. Like, she's a monster. Don't you jump off the couch. Oh. I'm sitting right here, Mama. She's a monster. Like, she doesn't stop. Like, seriously, this kid hasn't napped today. No, don't stay on my legs, baby. My life. You want more cereal?
Wipe it.
I'll wipe it.
It's boo-boo.
It's a boo-boo. Cece, are you hungry? Celeste. Hey, are you hungry?
Yeah.
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 Cereal.
I wipe it.
We'll wipe it. So, I feel really blessed this summer. I'm going to San Diego with Chris. We're going June 22nd through the 26th. No, the 26th we come home at 1:30 in the morning. And then the 26th, that afternoon at 5:30 at night, Bella, Cece, and I and my dad are flying back to North Carolina for 6 weeks. 6 weeks we're going to be in North Carolina, but Cece, right? And we're going to go spend time with our families and friends and everything else. And then we're going to come back August 7th. And then I fly to Scottsdale, Arizona on the 11th for a mini little retreat with my team. And we're going to have a lot of fun. What are you doing? This child does not sit still ever. Look at this. Bella, say hi. Bella, say hi. And I really love the fact that careful, Cece, there's a table there. Child. Yeah, day in the life with Cece. And just feel blessed that we can do that. We can travel the world. One day Chris can travel that long with us. You wonder why I need Thrive. That kid right there. Uh, 7:15 in the morning. Cece. Thrive is a must.
High fives?
Come say hi, Nana, Papa. Mimi, Papa. Cece?
Yucky? Good job.
Want to taste me?
You want Daddy to do push-ups
Want
again?
to taste me?
me chase or push-ups?
Chase me.
Okay.
Okay. Say goodbye to Nana.
Say goodbye.
Say goodbye to
So I can go
everybody.
chase you.
Bye.
You're so sweet. Cece, blow kisses. You're adorable. What are you doing, Cece? Are you stuck? Do you like the snow? Let me see. Is that snow? Is it cold? It's snow. Are you putting on your toes? Oh no. On the floor. Do you want to go play in the snow?
I'm cold.
It is cold, baby. Shut the door.
I'm not that cold.
It is cold.
I'm cold.
I know, baby. It's cold. So rub it on the door. Oh, you're putting on your toes? It's cold.
More.
You want more?
Yes. I'm cold.
I know it's cold.
Chris and Shanann's relationship appeared flawless, the kind of love that many would envy. They posted pictures of vacations, family outings, and daily moments of affection. Shanann frequently shared their family's journey with her growing social media following, and Chris played the role of the devoted husband, always there to support her, always smiling beside her. Their life together seemed perfect, a storybook romance, a fairy tale come to life. But what was being presented to the world was a carefully crafted illusion, one that hid the cracks beginning to form in the walls of their home. Behind the scenes, the reality was far different. Close friends, family members, and even co-workers paint a picture of a man who, despite his outward charm, was increasingly distant and emotionally unavailable. Interviews with those who knew Chris intimately reveal a man who began to grow cold and detached from his wife. Shanann, known for her vivacity and strength, seemed to be the only one holding their family together, trying to maintain the appearance of a happy home while the distance between them widened. She worked tirelessly, traveling for her business, often managing the household and children with a smile, all the while feeling the strain of her relationship. Chris, on the other hand, began withdrawing. Those closest to him recall how he would spend more time isolated, retreating into himself, often avoiding conversation. His family, who once saw him as the loving father and husband, started to notice small changes in his demeanor. Friends would later admit they had sensed something off in Chris's energy, but no one could have predicted the horrors that would unfold. Those cracks in the facade weren't immediately visible to the outside world, but they were there, hidden in plain sight. The image of the perfect family, so easily curated on social media, was carefully maintained. Shanann's posts were filled with affection and positivity, but those who knew her best saw the toll her husband's behavior had taken on her. She wrote about her struggles with her health and her attempts to keep their marriage intact, but there was always a hint of unease beneath her otherwise cheerful tone. Friends remember conversations where she expressed her concerns about the changing dynamic in her relationship with Chris, yet she never truly spoke of the deeper problems she was facing. Shanann's life was more than what she posted online. She was a mother, a businesswoman, a wife trying to hold it all together despite the cracks in her marriage. She poured herself into her work, seeking validation through her business and social media, but privately, she was exhausted, emotionally drained by a man who no longer seemed to care. Chris, meanwhile, continued to project his image as the loving father, engaging with their daughters in photos, playing with them in the yard, and presenting a picture of a family that had everything. But as friends began to notice, those moments felt increasingly hollow. Even as Chris was seen publicly as the perfect family man, his actions suggested otherwise. He was hiding an affair, one that would later become a critical piece of the puzzle, exposing the truth behind his emotional distance. Those close to Chris, including colleagues and friends, would later reveal how they had noticed the change in him long before anyone had an inkling of the terrible truth. Chris's emotional state seemed fragile, he was distracted and distant, yet he maintained the image of a man who had it all, almost like a well-rehearsed performance. The lies began to grow, not just between Chris and Shanann, but also between Chris and the world. He had learned to play the role of the perfect husband and father so well that no one suspected the cracks beneath the surface. But as the narrative he crafted began to unravel, it would become clear that the man behind the carefully curated posts and pictures was someone entirely different. In conversations with close friends, the emotional manipulation became evident. Chris had expertly kept his private struggles under wraps, revealing only bits and pieces to those who were close enough to notice. Shanann, on the other hand, felt increasingly isolated as her husband distanced himself from her. In hindsight, many of their friends recalled her attempts to reach out to him, trying to understand the growing tension in their relationship. But the more she tried, the further Chris seemed to pull away. Despite this growing emotional distance, Chris still performed for the world. He still played the role of the doting husband in front of the camera, still smiled in family photos, still posted affectionate messages for Shanann on social media. But behind those pictures was a man who was no longer invested in his family, at least not in the way he appeared to be. Those closest to him, now looking back, realize how much of it was an act, a performance he mastered in order to maintain the perfect image. As the tension in the Watts household continued to grow, the cracks in Chris's image would soon lead to something far more tragic. What appeared to be a perfect family life was, in reality, a life built on deception, manipulation, and an increasingly broken marriage. The cracks that had formed in Chris and Shanann's relationship would soon reveal themselves in the most horrific way. The image of the perfect family was gone, shattered by the actions of the man who had once been the picture of devotion. In the end, the story that Chris Watts had so carefully crafted for the world would be exposed, and the true nature of his relationship with his wife and daughters would come to light in ways that no one could have ever imagined. There is a deep and complex bond between a mother and her child, one that, for many, transcends all logic, reason, and reality. For Cindy Watts, this bond became a protective shield, a force so powerful that it shielded her from accepting the monstrous truth about her own son. Throughout the investigation into Chris Watts's horrific crimes, Cindy's continued defense of her son, despite the overwhelming evidence against him, became a striking example of psychological denial. It wasn't just about loyalty to her child, it was about a mother's refusal to confront the unthinkable reality, that the man she raised, the son she loved, could be capable of such devastating actions. Even as the details of the murders became clearer, even as Chris's confession unraveled in increasingly troubling ways, Cindy refused to acknowledge the truth. Her defense of Chris was unwavering. She repeatedly asserted that her son was a good man, a loving father, and a victim of circumstances. Insisting that Chris's actions were somehow beyond his control. This unwavering belief, even in the face of mounting evidence, spoke volumes about the psychological defense mechanisms at play. Cindy's insistence that her son was incapable of such brutality was not simply about her love for him, it was about an emotional need to protect herself from the trauma of accepting the unimaginable. Experts in family dynamics would later shed light on the phenomenon of denial in cases like this, how a parent can be so consumed by their emotional attachment to their child that they refuse to accept the truth, even when it's right in front of them. This psychological mechanism, while serving as a coping strategy in the short term, often causes long-term harm. For Cindy, it was a way to maintain some semblance of normalcy in her world, to avoid confronting the painful reality that her son had taken the lives of his wife and children. But this denial wasn't just self-preservation. It was a profound disconnect from the reality of what Chris had done. In interviews, Cindy clung to the belief that Chris was not capable of murder. She spoke of him as a loving son and devoted father, trying to reconcile the image of the man she knew with the monster the world had come to see. She would not, could not, accept that Chris was capable of such violence. "I don't believe he did it," she would say, even after all the evidence pointed to him. Her defense was rooted not in logic or reason, but in the deep, instinctual need to protect the image of her son and preserve the family bond that had existed for so long. The cognitive dissonance between the Chris she knew and the horrific reality of his actions created a barrier so strong that no amount of evidence could break through it. Psychological experts suggest that Cindy's response is not uncommon among parents in similar situations. The refusal to accept a child's guilt is often a defense mechanism, rooted in the profound emotional pain that accepting the truth would cause. For Cindy, confronting the fact that her son had murdered his wife and children would have meant shattering everything she believed about him. It would have meant losing the image of Chris as the loving, good-hearted man she had raised, and that was a loss she wasn't ready to face. Her defense of him was not an act of blind loyalty, it was an act of emotional survival. The psychological toll of this denial was evident in Cindy's behavior and words.
And I'm going to have you folks introduce yourself for the record.
I'm Cindy Watts.
Ron Watson.
Thank you. And I have authorized you to make a statement to the court as paternal grandparents of the children. And if you choose not to make a statement, but your designee, Ms. Powers, chooses to, she can do so as well. How would you like to proceed today?
I want you to start, but I would like to read
Who's going to be speaking today?
Your Honor, initially, they've asked me and they're hoping that they have the strength to speak, but if they do not, they've written out their statements and asked me to finish for them. So
That would be fine. Who would like to go first?
if I could start, Your Honor. On behalf of the Watts, Your Honor, and to the community, we thank you for the opportunity and the recognition under the Victim Bill of Rights. We come today as the grandparents and the parent of the daughter and children whose life was taken in this case. We are not here to ask for leniency. We are not in any way condoning or tolerating the crime that has occurred and the pain that has been caused. We join in our daughter-in-law and grandchildren's family in saying this should never have happened. This is not condonable. This is something that we will never get over. We appreciate the consideration that everyone has paid, most especially the families that have lost everyone. We appreciate that they begged for Christopher's life. We agree and echo what they have said, that it is not his place to take anyone's life, nor would it be our place as a community to take his life. So we thank you for the opportunity and for every consideration and effort that's been put out. The prosecution in this case has in fact respected the Victim Bill of Rights. They took the time to explain that the information that my clients had at the time that they were interviewed was not correct. They were misinformed, they were searching for answers, they were not intending to cause any pain to anyone, and they appreciate that the prosecution answered their questions and gave them the time and the respect and the consideration so that they could tell this court and everyone in this community that the interview content was not their message, that they accept that their son has done this, that they accept that he chose to plead guilty, that he sought and requested their consent and agreement for a life sentence. They appreciate that he is given the opportunity to serve that life sentence. It is his responsibility, it is his sentence, and it is not enough to make up for what has done. We understand and we join the family in that we have questions. We don't know how such a thing could possibly happen, or that a man that was responsible for raising his children and protecting his wife would take the steps that he did, and that he would disregard their bodies and the love that he had for them and they had for him and everyone else, and take the gestures and put this community through the investigation and the discovery and the responsibility of bringing justice. We do not understand that. We do not think it was appropriate. We cannot begin to think that an explanation will ever justify it. My clients indicate that they understand that a full opportunity for a confession with all of the responsibility and accountability has not occurred. And they support
the family and the request that that happen, if not today, at an appropriate time, in an appropriate manner, so that everyone can have peace, to understand to the best of their ability the details that they need and to have their questions answered. And by giving this opportunity of a life sentence, we hope that he embraces that moment. That had the death penalty been pursued, there would not have been an opportunity to be accountable and to give a full confession. And had the death penalty been sought, counsel would have fought for his life, the prosecutors would have been engaged in a multiple-year battle, the families would have been torn apart, this community would have had to subsidize it and endure it, and we have so much respect and gratefulness that that did not happen. We would strongly encourage Christopher Watts to give that full confession in the tone and in the timing that he thinks is appropriate with the guidance of his counsel. We feel that it would be appropriate and helpful to ease the pain and the suffering. But we also say we don't think that there's anything that he can say that will ever account for his behavior. There's nothing that can be done to cure the harm he has caused.
Even as she defended Chris, she seemed to be struggling with the implications of the case. There were moments when her defenses would falter, brief glimpses of doubt creeping into her words. But just as quickly as they appeared, she would reaffirm her belief in Chris's innocence, clinging to the version of events that she had constructed in her mind. This constant tug-of-war between doubt and denial created an emotional tug on Cindy, forcing her to juggle the reality of the situation with the need to maintain her unwavering belief in her son's goodness. Cindy's relationship with Chris also became an emotional battlefield. As the case progressed, and Chris's guilt became increasingly undeniable, Cindy's role in the narrative shifted. At first, she was a vocal supporter, fiercely defending her son against the world. But as the truth about Chris's crime became clearer, Cindy's defense became more isolated, more internalized. She was no longer defending Chris to the public, but rather, she was defending him to herself. The psychological weight of her denial grew heavier with each passing day. She became more and more entrenched in her version of events, retreating further from the painful reality that her son had committed an unforgivable crime. Chris Watts was, by all accounts, a man who understood the art of appearances. He was the embodiment of charm when it suited him, polite, soft-spoken, and well-liked. A family man with a devoted wife, 2 young daughters, and a steady job. In the years leading up to the murders, he was the kind of person that everyone trusted, the type of neighbor and friend that people would never suspect of harboring anything dark beneath the surface. But this image of the all-American dad is a far cry from the reality of the man who, when the time came, could commit horrific acts without a trace of remorse. To the world, Chris Watts was a puzzle. He appeared ordinary, even likable. Yet, as we dive deeper into his psychological profile, we begin to peel away the layers of manipulation and self-deception that he carefully constructed. His ability to maintain this mask of normalcy, even after committing such a horrific crime, speaks volumes about the complexity of his true nature. Psychologists often speak about the emotional disconnect in individuals who are capable of cold-blooded violence, and Chris's actions suggest that he was, indeed, emotionally detached from the severity of his crime. But is he a true psychopath, or is he simply someone unable to face the consequences of his actions? The answer lies in the details of his behavior, his responses to questions, and his inability to show genuine remorse. In the aftermath of the murders, Chris's interviews with law enforcement provide a chilling look into his psyche. Despite his confession, there are glaring signs that he still does not fully grasp the gravity of what he has done. Chris's demeanor during these interviews is cold, almost robotic. He speaks of his wife and children in a manner that lacks the emotional weight one might expect from a man who has just taken their lives. There is no visible sense of grief, no breakdown as he recounts their final moments. Instead, he speaks with the same detached calmness that he exhibited in the years before the murders. This emotional flatness is one of the key traits of psychopathy, an inability to empathize with others or understand the harm caused by one's actions. One of the most striking elements of Chris's behavior is his response to questions about his feelings. When asked how he felt about what he had done, Chris often deflects, speaking more about his situation than about the victims he had murdered. At times, he acknowledges that the crime was wrong, but these acknowledgments are devoid of any real emotional depth. He doesn't appear to feel the weight of his actions in the way most people would expect. Instead, he focuses on the logistical details of the crime, explaining how he killed Shannon and disposed of her body with a clinical detachment. His focus on the mechanics of the crime rather than its emotional consequences reflects a lack of emotional engagement with the horrific nature of what he has done. Prison footage of Chris later on paints a similar picture. In conversations with prison psychologists, his responses are calculated, and his emotional expressions are minimal. He often presents himself as a man who is simply going through the motions, trying to come to terms with his circumstances. But even in his prison interviews, there are moments when he speaks about his crime as if it were a regrettable but almost unavoidable consequence of his life's circumstances. He speaks of his marriage to Shannon as a burden, citing marital strife and personal dissatisfaction as the motivating factors for his actions. Again, he shifts the blame away from himself, presenting himself as a victim of his own unhappy circumstances rather than taking full responsibility for the choices he made. Psychologists who have analyzed Chris's case often point to his inability to truly empathize with others as a key indicator of his true nature. He was able to murder his wife and children and then carry on with his life, acting as if nothing had happened, without the typical signs of remorse or guilt. His actions suggest that, to him, the victims were nothing more than obstacles to his personal desires, a sentiment that's consistent with psychopathic behavior. Psychopaths are often described as having an inability to feel guilt or remorse, and Chris's actions and behavior after the murders suggest that he fits this profile. However, the question remains, was Chris a manipulative psychopath, or was he simply someone who couldn't face the consequences of his actions? His shifting confessions, his attempts to deflect blame, and his coldness in interviews suggest a man who is deeply committed to controlling the narrative of his life, even if it means distorting reality to avoid facing his guilt. Psychopaths often exhibit a profound lack of conscience, but Chris's behavior hints at something more complex, someone who is not only emotionally detached from his victims but also desperately attempting to protect his self-image at all costs. He is a man who cannot accept the depth of his crime, not because he feels guilty, but because doing so would require him to confront the darkness within himself. As we continue to explore Chris's true nature, it becomes evident that his psychological makeup is not as straightforward as it might seem. His lack of genuine emotion, his manipulation of the truth, and his ability to distance himself from the horror of his actions all point to a man who is either deeply psychopathic or unable to accept the full weight of his own decisions. In either case, the result is the same: a man who took the lives of his family and then went to great lengths to conceal the truth and maintain his facade of normalcy. After Chris Watts was convicted of murdering his wife and 2 daughters, the world looked to his family for a response. The public expected Cindy Watts, his mother, to confront the reality of her son's actions and reconcile the man she once knew with the monster the world had come to see. But instead, Cindy continued her defense, steadfast in her belief that Chris was innocent, or at least not entirely to blame for the brutal crimes he had committed. Her unwavering loyalty to Chris, even after his conviction, raised questions about the psychological toll it took on her and the impact it had on her relationship with her son. From the moment Chris was incarcerated, Cindy's refusal to accept his guilt became even more pronounced. In her interviews and public statements, she continued to claim that her son was not capable of murder. She remained convinced that Chris was somehow a victim in the tragedy, a man who had been driven to act by circumstances beyond his control. As the case progressed, and the evidence against him mounted, Cindy's denial grew deeper, more intense. Her belief that Chris was innocent remained unshaken, and she continued to portray him as a victim of the system, a man wrongly condemned. Post-conviction interviews with Cindy reveal the emotional toll that this denial took on her. Her voice, once confident, now carried a weight of exhaustion. Yet, despite her obvious pain, Cindy still clung to her protective role as a mother. When asked about the crimes Chris had committed, she would often deflect, returning to the narrative she had built for herself: Chris was misunderstood, manipulated, and ultimately a victim of his circumstances. She could not, and perhaps would not, confront the horrific reality that the man she had raised had taken the lives of his wife and children. Her defense was a psychological barrier, one that kept her from facing the deepest grief and betrayal a mother could experience. The psychological strain on Cindy was profound. As she continued to defend Chris in the face of overwhelming evidence, she became more isolated from those around her. Her public defense of her son alienated her from many friends and family members, who could not understand her refusal to accept the truth. Yet, despite this, Cindy's emotional attachment to Chris seemed to grow stronger. Her belief in his innocence became an anchor, a lifeline she held on to with everything she had. For Cindy, confronting the truth was simply too painful to bear. Instead, she chose to live in denial, a choice that ultimately shaped her post-conviction relationship with her son. Cindy's continued defense of Chris created a complex and deeply intertwined relationship between mother and son. In prison, Chris continued to communicate with Cindy, and the nature of their correspondence provides further insight into their dynamic. These prison letters and phone calls show a mother who refused to let go of her son, even as he confessed to the crimes in his own way. Cindy's letters to Chris were filled with expressions of love and support, and she remained a constant presence in his life behind bars. For Chris, these communications were a source of comfort, a reminder that he still had someone in his corner, despite the rest of the world's judgment. The psychological effects of Cindy's unwavering support were not only felt by her. Chris, too, seemed to feed off her denial, using it as a way to avoid fully confronting his guilt. In his prison letters, Chris continued to express a sense of confusion and regret, but never once did he fully take responsibility for the magnitude of his actions. His communications with Cindy were marked by the same self-preservation that characterized his behavior throughout the investigation. While he occasionally hinted at remorse, there was always an underlying sense of distance, a reluctance to acknowledge the true horror of what he had done. For both mother and son, their relationship was now rooted in a shared need for denial, Cindy, unable to accept her son's guilt, and Chris, unwilling to face the full emotional weight of his crime. The emotional toll on Cindy was palpable. Her denial kept her locked in a psychological struggle, constantly torn between the need to protect her son and the reality of his actions. Every phone call with Chris, every letter she wrote, was a reminder of her own refusal to let go of the image of Chris she had carried with her for so long. It became clear that Cindy was not just protecting Chris from the world, she was protecting herself from the devastating truth. The emotional cost of this continued defense was evident in Cindy's strained appearance and tired eyes during interviews. She was a woman who had lost so much. Not just in the form of her son's actions, but also in the form of the relationship she had once had with him. Her unwavering support of Chris, though it may have seemed like an act of love, was ultimately an act of self-preservation, keeping her from facing the unbearable reality. For Chris, the relationship with his mother provided a source of stability in an otherwise tumultuous time. Despite being in prison, he continued to rely on Cindy as his emotional anchor. Their correspondence continued to fuel his need to protect his own image. The love and support Cindy offered him allowed Chris to continue to evade full responsibility for his crimes. Through her defense, he was able to maintain his narrative as a man who was wronged, a man who made a mistake, rather than a cold-blooded killer. The relationship between Chris and Cindy became a dangerous feedback loop, each refusing to let go of the other's version of events, even as the rest of the world moved forward with the harsh truth. Cindy's refusal to confront the reality of her son's actions took a toll on more than just her relationship with Chris. It affected her relationships with the rest of the family and the wider community. Her continued defense of Chris alienated her from friends and family, many of whom could no longer support her position. Her stance became a point of contention, and the emotional strain only deepened as the trial progressed. In the end, Cindy's refusal to accept the truth about Chris didn't just break her relationship with the public, it broke her as a mother. Her inability to confront the horror of her son's actions left her stuck in a psychological limbo, unable to move forward or truly grieve. By the time Chris's conviction was final, Cindy's defense of him had become more than just a denial, it had become a psychological prison. The walls she had built to protect herself from the truth were closing in, and she was left to reconcile her deep love for her son with the unthinkable nature of his crimes. In the years that followed, Cindy's life would be defined by this struggle. Her unwavering maternal loyalty, though it may have once seemed like a natural instinct, had left her in a state of emotional paralysis, unable to reconcile the man she had raised with the monster he had become. By the time Chris Watts sat down for his final series of prison interviews, the truth was undeniable. The world had already learned of the gruesome murders, and the evidence was insurmountable. Yet, Chris's confessions were not a moment of clarity or emotional reckoning, they were yet another attempt to control the narrative. He had spent years shifting the blame, manipulating the story to fit his version of events. But in these final interviews, there were no more excuses, no more shifting the blame. The facade he had so carefully constructed began to crumble. His confession in prison was marked by an eerie detachment, a coldness that mirrored his behavior throughout the entire investigation. Chris admitted to the murders in a more direct way than he had in earlier interviews, but his words were hollow. He spoke of his wife Shanann's death, the deaths of his children, as if recounting a tragic event that had happened to someone else. He acknowledged the brutality of the crime, yet his tone lacked the depth of true remorse. He never seemed to grapple with the full emotional weight of his actions. There was no breakdown, no tears, no visible pain for the lives he had taken. At times, Chris expressed regret, but it was always distant and clinical. "I'm sorry for what I did," he would say, but the sincerity behind these words was questionable. His apologies were framed within a narrative of personal victimhood, blaming his actions on circumstances beyond his control. At one point, he spoke of the strained relationship with Shanann, implying that her actions had led him to act in a way he couldn't control. "I didn't want it to happen," he said, but there was no acknowledgement of the chilling coldness of his plan. He had made a conscious decision, and he followed through with it. Yet, even as he confessed, his words lacked the emotional recognition that one might expect from someone grappling with the gravity of what they had done. For Chris, the confession was not about facing the truth, it was about maintaining control over his image. He tried to craft a narrative where he was more of a victim than the man responsible for the brutal deaths of his family. Even in admitting his guilt, Chris's focus remained on self-preservation. He was not truly facing the full reality of his crime, he was attempting to manipulate the facts in his favor, just as he had done in his earlier confessions. His emotional detachment was a defense mechanism, a way to avoid the unbearable weight of guilt that might have otherwise broken him. In the same breath, Chris spoke of his regret, but never once did he show the anguish that one would expect from a father who had murdered his own children. His words were rehearsed, devoid of raw emotion. He explained the murders with a detached precision, often focusing more on the logistics of the crime than on the victims themselves. He described the planning, the execution, but his language was clinical and removed. His confessions, while more detailed, lacked the necessary emotional depth. He seemed almost more concerned with explaining how the crime happened than with expressing sorrow for the lives he had taken. As Chris's confession continued, it became clear that his emotional distance from the crime was not just a temporary lapse. It was a fundamental part of who he was. His ability to carry on, even in the face of his guilt, suggested a profound detachment from the human consequences of his actions. He had spent so much time convincing himself that he was a victim, trapped in an unhappy marriage, overwhelmed by the pressures of life, that he had never fully confronted the horror of his own actions. His final confession, though more direct, revealed the depths of his emotional disconnect, leaving the audience with a chilling portrait of a man who had become numb to the gravity of his crime. But perhaps the most unsettling part of this final chapter was not just Chris's confession, it was the lack of real acknowledgement of his true nature. Even as he admitted to the murders, there was still a sense of evasion, a reluctance to fully engage with the emotional reality of what he had done. The final confession revealed a man who was emotionally disengaged, unable or unwilling to understand the weight of his actions. He had manipulated the story for so long that, in the end, even his admissions felt hollow, disconnected from the full human cost of his crime. The truth of Chris Watts's nature, revealed through his final confessions, left lingering questions about his capacity for empathy, his understanding of guilt, and his relationship with his family. Was he a cold, calculated psychopath, fully aware of the harm he caused, or was he simply a man who could not face the emotional consequences of his actions? The emotional distance in his confession suggests a profound detachment from the reality of his crime, but it also reveals a man who was trying, one last time, to control the narrative. His final words were not an admission of guilt in the traditional sense, they were a final attempt to present himself in a light more sympathetic than the facts would allow. In the end, the final confession didn't just unravel the man Chris Watts had become. It highlighted the disturbing complexities of human nature. The contradictions within his words, his emotional detachment, and his struggle to accept responsibility exposed a man who had never truly faced the reality of his actions. Chris's confession, while more direct, left the audience with a sense of unease, challenging them to reflect on the deeper psychological questions that surrounded him. Who was Chris Watts? A man consumed by his own self-preservation? A psychopath incapable of understanding the magnitude of his crime? Or a person so emotionally disconnected that he could destroy the very people he claimed to love, without ever truly feeling the weight of his actions? As the final words of Chris's confession echo, we are left with a haunting realization: the answers to these questions are as complex and disturbing as the crime itself. The true nature of Chris Watts, and the depth of his emotional detachment, remains a chilling mystery, one that forces us to confront the uncomfortable realities of guilt, remorse, and the human capacity for evil.